The 1.7 DLC is coming out soon for Victoria 3. I'm making this in April 2024. The DLC releases in May. What am I doing? I haven't played it yet. Have I lost my mind? How do I predict the future? Well, we've seen the development diaries. We know what's coming. Now we have the capability to create an informal empire using soft power rather than the hard power used to create formal empires. What we see on the map here, all the pink stuff, that's the British color. In Canada, England, Ireland, South Africa, lots of India, Australia, a little bit of New Zealand, and that's going to change. That is a formal empire. Each of these areas has either a direct control from London or is a dominion puppet or, well, protectorate wouldn't be the same color, but it's still controlled by England. Whereas France, right now, in this game, I've conquered the bit of Algeria, nothing else. It doesn't have much of a formal empire. But what if I told you by the end of the century, the French Empire would rival the British in terms of trade and economic power, even though all the French really took over formally was West Africa and Southeast Asia. The British were painting the map. The French were buying the map. They didn't have to turn it their color. They just had to make the money sound French. That's all. Okay, what am I referring to with all this? I'm going to talk about the informal empire. Okay, this is a concept that was introduced by Jürgen Osterhammel in his paper Semi-Colonialism and Informal Empire in 20th Century China. I'll link the Osterhammel paper below. I'm also going to link an excellent book from 1902 by J.A. Hobson. It's called Imperialism. He was a historian writing about events as he saw them unfolding. It's a fantastic book, and in it he anticipates much of the early 20th century. Fascinating stuff. J.A. Hobson, Imperialism. Then a third link I'm going to have is for a book that I've just started reading. It's by David Todd. It's called Velvet Empire. It's about the building of the French Empire, which, again, it's this informal empire. And it was in that Todd book that I was referred to, the Osterhammel paper, which I'm going to quote from here in just a little bit. And to do it, the Osterhammel is looking at the Chinese Empire, the Great Qing that we have here on the map. He points out that during the 19th century and early 20th century, the great powers were opening up treaty ports within China and taking little bits of territory and giving themselves extraterritorial status within China. And that they were buying corporations or they were investing in corporations. They were either working directly with locals or creating local fronts to make it look like they're working with local. Lots of things going on there. But the point being that China itself never became an actual colony. It was never painted somebody else's color. It stayed its own color. But it was something of a semi-colony. That's why he's talking about here, semi-colonialism, and how pervasive it can be. And it was referred to in the book on the French Empire because that's exactly what the French were doing. So what we have here with these works is essentially a how-to guide on playing the French in the 1.7 patch, or any other nation that wants to go up against the British in building up a soft empire, an informal empire. Okay, what are the characteristics of a semi-colonial system? One where there's not an outright control of another country, but where there is, it's like the unwritten law that, yeah, if you want anything done, you've got to go through somebody else in a different capital to make sure it happens. Osterhammel gives us 10 characteristics, and I want to quote directly from his paper. 1. A power differential exists between two countries and is exploited by the stronger country, henceforth S, in pursuit of its own real or perceived interests in the weaker country, henceforth W. 2. S avoids direct rule over W. but possesses effective veto power over its domestic policymaking, intervening against any attempt to infringe upon its real or perceived interests in that particular country. Yeah, you should already be getting ideas if you've been reading the development diaries. Number 2 means you do not take over. You just fund the lobbies. You station your armies nearby. You do things to influence laws in that little country there, the W country. You don't actually go in and break things. You bend them. 3, S has the capability to impose basic guidelines for foreign policy orientation on W, ideally including it in asymmetrical alliances which are controlled by the hegemonial center. In other words, you're going to be protected by me, and if I need your troops in a war, you're going to give them to me. Or you'll let me at least base my troops while I attack somebody else. Something like that. The S dictates to the W what's going to happen. 4, S maintains some sort of military establishment in W and or is in a position to bring influence to bear on W's armed forces through military aid, advisors, and so on. It's not just enough to have a friendly ally. You want to make sure that that ally is at least decently armed. So when you call it up for battle, you don't have a bunch of peasants with spears and bows and arrows. You've got soldiers trained with rifles and cannon and so forth. 5, nationals of S maintain a substantial economic establishment in W, consisting of various types of businesses ranging from agency houses to subsidiaries of multinational corporations. The foreign direct investment that we're waiting for, that's an important part of your building your informal empire. 6, foreign actors are monopolistically or quasi-monopolistically entrenched in those sectors of W's economy that show above average rates of growth. The basic economic decisions concerning the allocation of resources in these sectors are taken by foreigners. Now this is a key one here, number 6. You don't necessarily go in and invest in every aspect of the economy. You cherry pick. You find the ones that have the best profit potential and go into those. So therefore, you look at some of these West African states, take them over directly, that can be messy. Why not instead bring them into your sphere, offer them incentives to build out rubber plantations? That's the profitable thing. And if they buy your grain, they buy your grain, whatever. But you want the rubber out of them. If there's oil, well, we'll take that as well. These are the things you want. And then they provide a market for the goods made back in the industrial center. If you have these areas, you don't necessarily want to see industry develop there. That was a case in Egypt. The British and French, they had a semi-colony going on in Egypt, and none of them wanted to see Egypt become an industrial power. They wanted it to produce raw materials and then be a market for their finished goods. So what do we do in the game? We only invest in the ones that have the profit potential and then dump the market with stuff that we make in our main country, so that way it kills off any potential local industry that's less efficient than the industrialized metropolitan stuff going on in the S nation. So think about that. Think about dumping your goods, and you'll be accomplishing point 6 there. Point 7, public finance in W is to a significant extent controlled by foreign private and or government banks. This control may be used to enforce political compliance. That's a really important one. I know there have been a number of games Paradox makes where there's a thing where you make lots of loans to the other country and then force them to pay you back, and you're spamming money, and people say, oh, that's an exploit. Well, that's historical. That is historical. In fact, there's a lot of that public finance business that France did in its soft empire building that really gave it, one could say, even more power than what the British had. over their areas. I continue. Number 8, W is a net recipient of capital, business and portfolio investment. Obvious enough, your money flows in there to build the things, and then the profits will come back. Because number 9, S's hold over the inferior nation is supported by the collaboration of indigenous rulers and comprador groups, or basically guys that you've compromised. Big Brother reserves the right to intervene in struggles for power, supporting contenders of his choice. Again, supporting those pro-your nation lobbies and trying to crush all the anti-ones, or ones that are pro some other nation. You are to build this informal empire, there is a lot of money involved. You spend some money on buying a few things and buying some politicians and buying some generals, but the profits that are made off of that expenditure provide a very strong return on investment, more so than investing domestically. Now, number 10, indigenous collaborators partly or completely share a common cosmology with the political and economic cities of the superior nation. Now, that common cosmology, what does that mean? Well, what are the British all about in Victoria III? They are a liberal organization. They want to change trade from protectionism or mercantilism to free trade. They want to introduce laissez-faire. All of this because it benefits them, but that's also part of their liberal political philosophy. Extend the vote, get rid of slavery, have rights, things like that. That's the British idea. That's their cosmology. What about the French? Well, during this time period, if we look between 1836 and 1870, France is an autocratic nation. Yes, there's the period of the Second Republic, but that's only a very short time. And Napoleon III subverts that republic and turns it into the Second Empire. And even before 1836, we have a large period. After the First Republic is then subverted by Napoleon I, and he has the First Empire, then you have another monarchy and another monarchy, and it's just loads of monarchy all the way up to 1870. France remains autocratic, so it is a conservative force opposed to the British liberal reforms. And that means its sphere can appeal to nations that want to keep their conservatism, like Brazil. It didn't get rid of slavery until 1888. The French were very happy to invest there, whereas the British were like, oh dear, there's slavery here. We don't like that. French are like, c'est la vie. No, it's going to happen. We don't want to tell you what to do. Other places around the world, again, they had their slavery, forced labor, or were scared about the British taking over and making their rulers less authoritarian. The French said, that's okay. We'll invest in your country anyway. You can join us and share in our conservative views. After 1870, all right, things change in France. I'll agree on that. But still, the French Empire has this wink and a nod attitude. It doesn't try to force other countries to lose their conservatism. And that's where it is the opposite of the British. That's how you can play France to go up against the British. Don't be trying to change everybody. If you do that, you're competing with the same nations that Britain's competing for. You go after the conservatives, I bet you'll find they'll be happier in your little trade sphere than in the one run from London. The other things that we see here in this semi-colonialism are how, like, there was a war where Argentina tried to conquer Uruguay, and both the French and the British intervened. The British because they didn't want to see a nation get wiped off the map by a stronger neighbor. The French because they didn't want Argentina to get much stronger than it already was, and by helping the Uruguayans out, they'd be a little bit beholden to them, and there would be some money associated with there. That would mean a strategy within the 1.7 Victoria 3 would be to target if you're an S nation, to target your W nations and make sure that you intervene in any diplomatic plays that go against them. You don't necessarily have to demand territory, demand reparations, absolutely, but you don't have to demand territory. And in so doing, you preserve the little W nation and bring it closer into your S sphere where you can dictate more of the economic, military, and diplomatic and political situation that's going on in that W nation. And it would also stand to reason that if there are nations trying to conquer each other, if you make both of them part of your sphere, you benefit there, and you can make sure that they play off against each other, and you can deal with it that way. So yes, go help protect those nations. Whatever other spheres are going after, don't compete on the same ones. Go for the ones that they can't get, and you will probably, if you don't try to change too much about them, they'll be happy with you. So as France, go for those monarchies, those conservative areas. And they also focused on luxury trades. This is interesting here. British dealt with a lot of bulk goods, but the French really went in for silk and furniture and fine clothes and wine. Oh la la. All these Dolce Vita things, although that's Italian, but I digress. The French were going after the luxury items and would try to corner those markets. This gives another aspect of play for 1.7. When you look at all the goods that are out there, what if you decided to stake your ground and say, my country won't just be the number one producer in the world, it will dominate that good. We will make so much of it, nobody even tries to get involved in that trade, and we take all the money from it. Build a monopoly, or pursue a monopoly, pursue an oligopoly, where it's only you and a few other nations that are really making that good, and there's no other competition anywhere else in the world. They've got to come to you for that good, and you keep the price high to benefit your local manufacturers. Then another one, foreign loan obligations. I haven't seen anything in the developer diaries about lending money to other countries. I hope that's a thing. I hope we can go up to them and say, you will borrow money. That's a thing the French did. They would tell other countries, you're going to borrow money. What you're going to spend it on, don't know, don't care, but you're going to borrow it. And we're going to collect interest from you. And if you can't pay your interest, then something else will happen, and you get even more control from us. Why would you want to have to own the businesses when you can just collect interest off of the loans to buy them? Think of that. If you're wondering where I'm going with this, or what basis we have for this, again, we go back to the paper I referenced on China, where in the 20s, the French had very little ownership or investment in Chinese businesses, whereas the British were heavily invested, Japanese investment, American investment, lots of that. But the French had about 25% of foreign loan obligations in China. They had cornered that market. They loaned all the money to buy all this stuff, and were making huge amounts of cash off of that. Another aspect of a semi-colonial arrangement is where the strong nation profits from trade that is contained in the market of the weaker nation. It doesn't necessarily have to have that weaker nation export to somewhere else to make a profit. It just has to be owned and invested by the strong nation. They could buy, for example, all the coal in the mines in China, but that coal is then being used by the steel mills owned by that nation, also in China, to make steel for building operations in China that you don't own, but that's where you make your profit. The government's buying the steel. Great. The whole trade stays within that country, but because your nation is strategically invested in these elements, it collects the profits from that trade, and the profits leave the country and come back to yours. And that's why the S stays S. It's got the banking. It's got the profits are flowing from this weaker nation to the stronger nation. That's why Japan did not want to have this happen. They wanted to make sure that all the profits stayed in Japanese banks and were invested in Japan, not London, not Paris, not New York, in Japan. The Latin American nations didn't have these arrangements, and that's why much of their money left and went to enrich North America and Europe. Africa, same thing. Lack of local banking. The profits from the businesses that were there went to other nations. So in 1.7, in Sphere of Influence, we're going to get a chance to not paint the world your map color, but to leave all the colors the way they are. You're just painting underneath them your color, all working under the surface. And if this now starts to make sense why they were using tentacles and ink and just stuff flowing in a weird way in that video, that's exactly the kind of game that you get to play in Sphere of Influence. I'm predicting, I'm hoping, please. I don't know if they're going to have the loans pieces, but everything else there, all these other bits that we have, the 10 areas that Osterhammel outlined, and if you go to the Osterhammel paper that I've linked below, page 4 and 5 are where these are listed out. But I recommend reading the whole thing. I recommend reading J.A. Hobson's Imperialism, and if you want to buy another book, go ahead and get Velvet Empire by David Todd. This is not an endorsement that I'm being paid for. This is just something that I, as a historian, am reading right now. And if you don't want to buy a book, that's fine. The Imperialism book by Hobson is public domain, made in 1902. And the paper by Osterhammel is linked. You just search Jürgen Osterhammel and Informal Empire. First link, that's the paper, and you're there. But like I said, I'm linking them below. And you can like, comment, and subscribe on this video to help this channel out. A whole heap of them out there, as they say in Australia there. Please like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps me grow and helps other people who are like you find this, because it won't get suggested to them by YouTube unless you help say, oh yeah, I like it, I commented, I subscribed. And then other people who share your interest will be able to find this, and we have a even wider discussion. So I hope this helps you out. I hope this gets you started on researching more about semi-colonialism, a very exciting topic. And I really hope that this is what we have in the 1.7 DLC. So until next time, I hope all your diplomatic plays go the way you want. And this is yet another video where I do not unpause, but have so much content. Who knows? We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.